All right, today we're going to talk about a single decision, one announcement on a summer night that completely re-engineered the modern economy. It's a story that explains so much about the value of your paycheck, the crazy price of housing, and the world we all live in right now. So let's rewind the clock and see exactly how it all went down.
To really get this, we have to travel back in time. So, picture it. You're living in America, and the year is 1971. The world feels a lot different, and I mean a lot different, especially when it comes to money.
In this world, gas is just 36 cents a gallon. You could buy a brand new house for about 25 grand. And for a lot of families, a single, steady income was actually enough to live on and live comfortably. That was the reality, and it was all built on a very specific foundation.
And that foundation? It was gold. For decades, the entire global financial system was literally anchored to something real, something you could touch, something that was scarce.
And this system had a name, the gold standard. It basically meant that every single US dollar out there was backed by a physical amount of gold sitting in a vault. Your dollar wasn't just a piece of paper, it was a promise. It was like a claim check for a tiny piece of real physical gold.
Now, the whole point of this was discipline, financial discipline. The gold standard acted like a leash on governments. They couldn't just, fire up the printing presses whenever they felt like it, because every new dollar they created had to be backed by gold they actually had in the vault.
So after World War II, this whole thing gets official. World leaders meet up in a place called Bretton Woods, and they agree to make the US dollar the world's go-to currency. Why? Because the US promised that its dollar would always be good for gold at a fixed rate, $35 an ounce. So other countries just pegged their currencies to the dollar, and this created a pretty stable, predictable global economy. Well, for a little while anyway.
But, and there's always a but, right? That stability, it had a fatal flaw. That golden leash, the very thing that was supposed to keep everyone in line, it started to fray. And then it snapped. So here's the catch. The US government needed a lot of money for things like the Vietnam War and huge social programs at home. So it started doing the one thing the gold standard was designed to stop. It started printing way more dollars than it actually had gold to back them up. Well, by the 1960s, other countries started to get suspicious. They started doing the math. They looked at the flood of dollars all over the world. Then they looked at America's gold reserves, and they all came to the same pretty scary conclusion. Wait a second, America. There's no way you have enough gold to back all these dollars. So what do you do when you think someone's bluffing? You call them on it. And that's exactly what happened. Countries like France and Germany started showing up with piles of US dollars and demanding their gold, which was their right under the agreement. Ships were literally crossing the Atlantic, hauling gold bars out of US vaults. America's gold was draining away, and a full-blown crisis was brewing. Okay, so this is where everything comes to a head. With its gold reserves just flying out the door, the US government was backed into a corner. It had to make a choice, and that choice would define the next 50 years of our economic history. And that choice came on one specific day, August 15th, 1971. President Nixon interrupted Sunday night television to address the nation. The whole world was watching, but I don't think anyone was really prepared for what he was about to say. He announced that the U.S. was, and I quote, temporarily closing the gold window. This meant foreign countries could no longer show up and trade their dollars for gold. In that one moment, the link was completely severed. And get this, that temporary measure, it's still in effect today. And just like that, with one announcement, the world entered a brand new era. The dollar became what we call fiat money. Its value wasn't tied to a pile of metal anymore. It was based purely on trust in the US government. So what happens when you completely remove that golden leash? What happens when you untether money from reality? Well, the consequences were immediate and they were massive. Well, here's the most important part. With the discipline of gold totally gone, the government and the Federal Reserve were now free to create as much money as they wanted, whenever they wanted. And you know what happens when you have a flood of new money chasing the same amount of stuff, right? Prices go up. They have to. And the result wasn't just a little bit of inflation, it was an explosion in prices. Just look at these numbers. The average home went from 25 grand to over $500,000. The stock market from around 100 points to over 6,600.
Even gold itself, the thing the dollar was cut loose from, skyrocketed from 35 bucks an ounce to over 3,700. The price of everything just went vertical. Well, almost everything. Look, this isn't just some boring history lesson. This one decision, made over 50 years ago, directly impacts your wallet, your savings, and it explains why it can feel so incredibly hard to get by today. It created something that people now call the Great Disconnect. You see, since 1971, the value of assets, things people own, like stocks and real estate, has absolutely exploded. But what about the one thing most people rely on? Their paycheck. Well, when you adjust for all that inflation, real wages have basically gone nowhere. They've stayed almost completely flat. I mean, just look at this chart. The gap that opened up is absolutely staggering. On one side, you have this towering, massive growth of asset prices. And on the other, you have the tiny, almost invisible growth of real wages. And this, right here, this explains so much. It explains why owning things has become the main way to build wealth, while just working for a living, well, that's made it harder and harder to actually get ahead. So think about it. The biggest economic problems we're all talking about today. The housing crisis, the insane student debt problem, the feeling that the stock market is completely detached from reality, the widening gap between the rich and everybody else. A huge part of why these problems exist can be traced right back to the consequences of that one decision in 1971. So, what it all boils down to is this fundamental trade-off. You had the gold standard, which was all about discipline, and now you have fiat money, which is about freedom. But that freedom comes with a price: more debt, more bubbles, and a lot more inequality. Which leaves us with one big, final question. Did America free itself that night, setting up the economy for amazing new growth? Or did we accidentally unleash a kind of monster, a system that eats away at our paychecks while making the things the wealthy own go to the moon? The consequences are all around us, and now you know where it all began.